I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. During Monday's press briefing, Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the U.S. is at, quote, serious risk of having a national ban on abortion. Psaki also condemned congressional Republicans for advocating to restrict a woman's right to choose. Listen in for the White House press secretary's full comment.
On abortion, Republican leader Mitch McConnell has said that a national ban on abortion could be possible, depending on the votes. Without court intervention, just how at risk does the administration believe the U.S. is to completely outlawing abortion?
I think we're at serious risk. You noted Mitch McConnell and other Republicans in Congress are talking about a national ban on a woman's right to choose. There were a number, I think it was something, I can get the exact number here, but dozens and dozens of Republicans in Congress signed on to the Mississippi court case and advocating for severe restrictions on a woman's right to choose and a woman's right to make choices about her own body. And we've seen in other places in the country. Just yesterday, the governor of Mississippi said directly whether that. Just yesterday, the governor said directly whether they wouldn't say whether they would directly go after the right to use contraception, meaning that's another area where, so as the president has said over the course of the last nearly week, his concern is about, yes, a woman's right to make choices about her own health care, about what this final opinion could be. It's also about what choices could be made that go beyond that. I'd also note that Louisiana legislators advanced a bill to classify abortion as homicide, which would allow women who terminate their pregnancies to be charged with murder and potentially criminalize in vitro fertilization and forms of birth control. So in some ways, yes, you're seeing an outcry by the nearly 2/3 of the public, many of them peacefully protesting, who are concerned about what this opinion will say. But you're also seeing a number of Republicans in states and some in Congress double down on this potential to overturn a law that has been the law of the land for 50 years.
You mentioned that the Mississippi governor and his comments on the possibility of banning certain types of contraception. Is the administration planning to take steps to try and preemptively safeguard access to contraception?
Well, I would say there's a range of considerations that are underway, both by our counsel's office, by the Department of Justice, led by the Gender Policy Council, to take every step we can to protect women's fundamental rights and protect rights beyond that. I would note that, and the president talked about this a little bit last week, but when we're talking about Roe has been the precedent for a number of other laws passed by the Supreme Court that impacts people's fundamental lives, their basic rights, their freedoms, their privacy, and their protections, including, if you look back, Griswold versus Connecticut, Eisenstadt versus Baird, which ensured the right to use contraception was protected. That is law now, but we are clear-eyed about this being a precedent for that and what could come next. Obergefell versus Hodges, which protects the right to marry. Lawrence versus Texas, which stops government from preventing sexual relationships between consenting adults. For 50 years, Roe has been the basis for a number of these decisions that have impacted and changed people's lives, in our view, for the better.
You mentioned again, obviously you're discussing next steps here. You've said before that you're not going to detail what's sort of on the table, especially until the final ruling comes down. But why not? Especially when states have trigger laws, sort of why not communicate at least what the options are to try and get ahead of some of this, give women some assurances, as we see, obviously growing concern across the country? Sure,
Mary. Well, what I've talked about a little bit in here in the past, which people can look to as a model for what we're trying to do, is what we've done in response to SB 8 in Texas, right? We created the Dire Need Grant Awards to provide funding to expand access to emergency contraception and family planning services. In addition, you also saw the Department of Justice and the Attorney General release a statement in response to Texas SB 8 that reaffirmed their commitment to using existing federal law to protect the safety of patients seeking access to reproductive health services. The Department of Health and Human Services has also been implementing a three-pronged department-wide response to protect patients and providers. We've also talked in here a great deal about the fact that we know that 26 states have indicated their plans on a different varying levels, I should say, of overturning women's fundamental rights. 13 have trigger laws, and what we're looking at, and some states have also taken steps. Connecticut, California are two of them. Others are also examples to protect women's rights. What we're looking at here is nearly half the country potentially not allowing women to have access to choices about their own bodies and their health care that has been the law of the land for 50 years. So, and we know who that will impact because 75% of people seeking abortions make less than 200% of the poverty level. We know the majority of people seeking abortions are women of color. So we are taking into account all of that as we look at options. Go ahead.
Just to follow up on all that, Mary asked what I would for the most part, but
Look at that collegiality at play.
when are we going to hear from the president on this issue? We've heard from just about every other Democrat. You've clearly come prepared with all the details today. Do we have to wait until the court ruling is official, or might he speak out beforehand?
I would say he spoke multiple times last week, and I expect you'll continue to hear him speak about this issue.
He spoke on the tarmac, it was noisy.
Does that not count?
Well, I just wonder if there's going to be something slightly more prepared and thoughtful to try to, make use of the presidential bully pulpit the way he can. When he wants to, he can draw attention to issues.
You're right, and what I was pointing to, Ed, is that obviously this was in his mind and front and center for him last week because he spoke multiple times to this, unprompted in some cases, some prompted by questions, of course, and I expect he will continue to do that. What I don't expect he will do is speak to an opinion that is not yet final, that has not yet been released, but certainly speaking to the protection of women's fundamental rights, of their rights to make decisions about their own health care, and certainly his concern, which he's talked about for decades, about privacy and privacy protections, which he said last week was the basis of his leading the fight against the board nomination. So I expect you'll continue to hear him talk about that, and there will be more opportunities for you all to ask good questions.